Imagine you're at your ex-husband's wedding. The man who destroyed your life took everything from you and left you broken on the floor. But instead of being the victim he expects to see, you're standing there as a successful entrepreneur, pregnant with triplets, with a man who actually loves you by your side. And you're about to do something that will change everything. I need to tell you a story that still gives me chills every time I think about it. It's about a woman named Sarah, though that's not her real name, and how she turned the most devastating betrayal of her life into the foundation of something extraordinary. Because sometimes the people who break us end up giving us exactly what we need to become who we were always meant to be. It started 7 years ago. Sarah was 26, madly in love, and about to marry the man she thought was her soulmate. David was charming, ambitious, and had this way of making her feel like she was the most important person in the world. When he talked about his dreams of starting his own business, she didn't just support him, she believed in him with every fiber of her being. "I want to build something with you," he'd whisper to her at night. "Our future, our legacy, but I need your help to make it happen." Sarah had been saving money since she was 18. Every birthday check, every summer job, every penny she could spare went into this account that she called her future fund. By the time she met David, she had almost $30,000 saved up, a fortune for someone her age. It represented years of sacrifice, of choosing to stay home instead of going out, of buying generic brands and cooking every meal at home. When David asked her to invest in his business, she didn't hesitate for a second. "This is our future," she told herself as she signed the papers, transferring her entire life savings to his business account. "We are building this together." For 2 years, she watched him pour himself into that business. She worked 2 jobs to support them both while he got it off the ground, never questioning the long hours, the mysterious phone calls, the way he seemed to pull away from her more and more each day. When she asked about the business, he'd brush her off. "You wouldn't understand the financial stuff, babe. Just trust me." And she did trust him, even when friends started asking questions, even when her own mother pulled her aside and said, "Something doesn't feel right about this, honey." Sarah defended him fiercely. This was love, she told herself. This was partnership. The first crack in her perfect world came on a Tuesday morning in March. She was making coffee when David's phone buzzed on the counter. The message preview was from someone named Jessica. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you too." Sarah's hand started shaking as she picked up the phone. The message thread went back months. Photos, intimate conversations, plans for a future that didn't include her. Her David, her partner, her best friend, the man she'd given everything to, had been living a double life. When she confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He just looked at her with this cold, almost bored expression and said, "I've been trying to tell you, Jessica and I are getting married." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What about us? What about the business? What about my money?" David's laugh was the cruelest sound she'd ever heard. "Your money? Sarah, that money is tied up in business assets. Even if I wanted to give it back to you, which I don't, it's not liquid anymore. Besides, you invested in the business voluntarily. I have the paperwork to prove it." And just like that, 7 years of her life, her entire financial future, and her faith in love itself crumbled to dust. The next 6 months were the darkest of Sarah's life. She moved back in with her parents at 28, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by posters of boy bands and participation trophies. She'd wake up every morning, and for just a split second, she'd forget what had happened. Then reality would crash over her like a wave, and she'd have to remember all over again that everything she'd built was gone. Her friends tried to help, but how do you explain that level of betrayal to someone who's never experienced it? "You'll get through this," they'd say. "You're better off without him." But Sarah didn't feel better off. She felt like a fool. She felt broken. She felt like she'd never be able to trust anyone, including herself, ever again. The divorce proceedings were brutal. David's lawyers painted her as a naive woman who'd made a bad business decision. They argued that she'd willingly invested in his company and had no legal claim to the money. And technically, they were right. She'd signed the papers, she'd trusted him, and that trust had made her legally defenseless. She lost almost everything in the divorce: the house, the car, her entire savings. David kept the business, which was now worth over $200,000. Sarah walked away with her clothes, her student debt, and a heart that felt like it had been put through a blender. But here's where the story gets interesting, because sometimes when you lose everything, you finally discover what you're really made of. Sarah spent 3 months in therapy, walking through not just the betrayal, but the deeper question of how she'd lost herself so completely in someone else's dreams. Her therapist asked her a question that changed everything. What did you love to do before you met David? What dreams did you put aside to support his? The answer came to her immediately: jewelry design. Before David, before the relationship consumed her entire identity, Sarah had been obsessed with creating beautiful things. She'd spend hours sketching designs, saving up for beads and wire, making pieces for friends and family. People always told her she had a gift, but David had called it a cute hobby. Gradually, she'd stopped creating altogether. That weekend, she went to a craft store and bought her first set of jewelry making supplies in 4 years. Her hands remembered the movements like muscle memory, the feel of the wire, the weight of the beads, the satisfaction of seeing a design come to life. It all came flooding back. She started small: a pair of earrings for her sister, a necklace for her mom. Friends started asking where they could buy pieces like that. Within a month, she had her first official order, a bridesmaid's jewelry set for $50. Sarah threw herself into her craft with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. She learned about social media marketing, taught herself product photography, and studied successful jewelry brands online. She worked at a coffee shop during the day and made jewelry at night, often until 2 or 3 in the morning. The business grew slowly at first, then faster. Her designs had something special, a delicate strength that resonated with women who'd been through their own struggles. Each piece felt like it carried a story, a reminder that beautiful things could emerge from difficult places. But the real transformation wasn't just financial. As Sarah rebuilt her business, she was rebuilding herself. She started setting boundaries. She learned to trust her own instincts. She discovered that she was not only capable of taking care of herself, she was exceptional at it. About 2 years after the divorce, Sarah met Marcus at a small business networking event. He was funny, kind, and when she told him about her jewelry business, his eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "That's incredible," he said. "I'd love to see your work sometime." Their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Sarah had learned the difference between someone who supported her dreams and someone who wanted to absorb her into theirs. Marcus celebrated her successes, encouraged her ambitions, and never once suggested that she was too focused on her business or that she should slow down to make more time for him. When they decided to move in together, Marcus insisted on keeping their finances separate until they were married. "I want you to always know that you're choosing to be with me, not because you need me," he said. It was the opposite of everything David had represented, and it made Sarah love him even more. By year 3, Sarah's jewelry business was bringing in 6 figures annually. She'd been featured in several online magazines, had a waiting list for custom pieces, and was shipping orders internationally. More importantly, she'd found her voice. She started sharing her story on social media, not just the success, but the journey. The betrayal, the rebuilding, the lessons learned. Women started reaching out to her from all over the world. They shared their own stories of financial abuse, of dreams deferred, of having to rebuild from nothing. Sarah realized that her story wasn't just her own. It was part of a much larger conversation about women, money, and power. She began hosting workshops not just about jewelry making, but about financial independence and building businesses after life setbacks. She partnered with organizations that helped women leaving abusive relationships. Her brand became about more than beautiful jewelry. It became about empowerment, resilience, and the radical act of betting on yourself. Meanwhile, David's business had been struggling. The industry had changed and he hadn't adapted. Sarah heard through mutual friends that he'd lost several major clients and was barely keeping things afloat. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a kind of peaceful indifference that surprised her. Then came the invitation. It arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 4 years after their divorce was finalized. Cream-colored cardstock, elegant script. David Mitchell and Jessica Chen request the pleasure of your company at their wedding ceremony. Sarah stared at the invitation for a long time. Why would he invite her? Was this some kind of twisted attempt at closure, a power play? Or maybe Jessica didn't know the whole story and insisted on inviting the poor ex-wife out of some misguided sense of politeness. Marcus found her sitting at the kitchen table, still holding the invitation. "What's that?" he asked, then saw her expression. "Oh." "He invited me to his wedding," she said, her voice flat with disbelief. Marcus sat down beside her. "Are you going to go?" Sarah looked at him. This man who loved her fiercely but never possessively, who celebrated her strength instead of trying to diminish it. "I don't know," she said. "Part of me thinks I should just throw this away and move on with my life." "And the other part?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "The other part wants to see what happens if I show up as who I actually am now instead of who he left behind." They talked about it for hours. Marcus never tried to influence her decision. He just listened, asked thoughtful questions, and reminded her that whatever she chose, he'd support her completely. In the end, it was a message from one of the women in her workshops that made up Sarah's mind. "Your story saved my life," the woman had written. "Knowing that someone could lose everything and build it back stronger gave me the courage to leave my abusive marriage. I start my own business next month. Thank you for showing me it was possible." Sarah realized that going to the wedding wasn't about David at all. It was about standing fully in her own power, refusing to hide from any part of her story, and demonstrating to herself and to anyone watching that she was no longer the woman who could be diminished by someone else's betrayal. Plus, she had news of her own to share. She and Marcus had just found out they were expecting not just one baby, but triplets. After being told by doctors for years that pregnancy might be difficult for her, which David had used as another way to make her feel broken, she was carrying 3 healthy babies. The irony was almost too perfect. The wedding was exactly what Sarah expected: elegant, expensive, and somehow hollow. She and Marcus arrived fashionably late, Sarah wearing a stunning dress that she designed herself, and Marcus in a suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. She could feel eyes on them as they took their seats, could hear the whispering starting to ripple through the crowd. During the ceremony, Sarah caught David's eye exactly once. She saw the moment he registered who she was, not the broken woman he'd left behind, but someone completely transformed. Confident, glowing, obviously successful. His face went pale and his hands visibly shook as he fumbled with the wedding rings. The reception was where things got interesting. Sarah and Marcus mingled easily, her natural charm and his one personality making them popular conversation partners. People kept asking about her work, her dress, her obvious pregnancy. She answered every question with grace and genuine enthusiasm, never mentioning David by name but allowing her success to speak for itself. Then David's business partner, a man Sarah remembered from the early days, approached their table. Sarah Matthews, is that really you? It's Sarah Chen now, actually, she said, gesturing to Marcus. We just got married last month. The man's eyes widened. I can't believe it. David always said... He stopped himself, clearly realizing he was about to say something inappropriate. What did David always say? Sarah asked, her voice perfectly calm but her eyes sharp. The man looked uncomfortable. Well, he said you couldn't handle the stress of his business growth, that you had some kind of medical issues. That's why you two divorced. Sarah felt Marcus tense beside her, ready to defend her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. This was her moment. Medical issues, she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. David's family members turned to stare. The man looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him up. Triplets, said David's aunt, a woman Sarah had once considered family. But David told us you couldn't have children, that it was one of the reasons your marriage didn't work out. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that could cut glass. David told you I couldn't have children? That's fascinating, because my doctors say I'm one of the most fertile women they've ever seen. These babies were conceived on our honeymoon, actually. She could see David out of the corner of her eye, frozen in conversation with another guest, his face getting redder by the minute. You know, Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the reception area, it's amazing how stories change over time. For instance, I remember David telling people that I'd invested my savings in his business as a gift because I believed in his vision. But my lawyer has paperwork showing it was actually a loan that was never repaid. Funny how memory works, isn't it? The business partner had gone completely white. A loan? He said it was a gift from your family. My family? Sarah laughed, a sound like silver bells. My family is teachers and social workers. They don't have $30,000 lying around to give as gifts. No, that was my money. Money I'd been saving since I was 18. Money that funded the first 2 years of David's business while I worked 2 jobs to pay our living expenses. By now, half the reception was listening. Sarah could see David pushing through the crowd towards our table, his new bride Jessica trailing behind him, looking confused and mortified. Sarah, David's voice was strained, fake cheerful. I didn't expect you to actually come. Sarah stood up slowly, Marcus rising beside her like a protective shadow. She was radiant in her success, her pregnancy giving her an almost ethereal glow. David looked smaller than she remembered, older, worn down in a way that success was supposed to prevent.
David, she said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. Congratulations on your wedding. Jessica, you look absolutely beautiful. I'm Sarah, by the way, David's first wife. Jessica's smile faltered slightly. Oh, hi! David's mentioned you, of course. I'm so sorry to hear about your difficulties after the divorce. Difficulties? Sarah tilted her head, genuinely puzzled. I'm sorry, what difficulties? Jessica glanced at David, who looked like he was about to be sick. Well, David said you had a really hard time adjusting to being on your own, that you struggled financially and emotionally after he left. Sarah's eyes widened in apparent surprise. David, what an interesting story you've been telling. I'm curious, in this version of events, what happened to my business? Your business? Jessica looked confused. Yes, my jewelry business, Chen Designs. We were just featured in Vogue last month, actually. I'd be happy to show you the article. Sarah pulled out her phone with practiced ease. See, here's the 6-page spread. And here's our revenue report from last quarter. We hit 1.2 million in sales. Jessica stared at the phone, then at David, then back at Sarah. David never mentioned that you had a business. Oh, there's a lot David didn't mention, apparently. Sarah's voice remained perfectly pleasant, but there was steel underneath the silk. For instance, did he tell you how my business started? Sarah, David said, his voice carrying a warning, this isn't the place. Oh, but it's the perfect place, Sarah interrupted, her smile never wavering. Your wedding day should be about celebrating love and partnership, don't you think? About honesty and building a future together. I think Jessica deserves to know the real story about partnership, about what it looks like when someone truly supports your dreams. She turned to Jessica, her voice becoming softer, more intimate. You see, when I lost everything in our divorce, my savings, my home, my entire financial security, I had a choice. I could stay broken or I could build something new. And I realized that the best business ideas often come from solving your own problems. Sarah paused, letting the crowd lean in. My problem was that I'd given away my financial power to someone who didn't deserve it. So I built a business that helps women keep their power. Every piece of jewelry I create comes with a story of resilience. Every sale goes partly toward a fund that helps women start their own businesses after major life transitions, divorce, death of a spouse, escaping abusive relationships. The reception had gone completely quiet now. Sarah could see David's parents, his siblings, his college friends, all staring at him with new understanding. In fact, Sarah continued, just last month we launched a program called Reclaim Your Crown. It provides microloans and business mentorship to women who've been financially exploited by partners. The waiting list is over 300 women long. Jessica's face had gone from confusion to dawning horror. David, she said quietly, is this true? Did you take her money? David opened his mouth, but no words came out. In that moment of silence, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a profound sense of completion. You know what the beautiful thing is? Sarah said, addressing the crowd now instead of David. I used to think that what happened to me was a tragedy, that losing everything was the worst thing that could happen to someone. But it turns out sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're actually capable of building. She placed her hand on her rounded belly, and Marcus immediately wrapped his arm around her waist. These babies weren't supposed to be possible according to David's version of my story. But here we are. My husband Marcus and I found out we're having triplets just 2 weeks ago. And the really beautiful part? Marcus has already started planning how to adjust our business so I can work from home more after they're born. He researched lactation-friendly office setups and asked me what kind of support I'd need to keep growing the company. Because that's what real partnership looks like. Sarah looked directly at David for the first time since the conversation started. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for showing me exactly what I deserved and exactly what I was capable of creating for myself. I genuinely hope you two will be very happy together." And with that, she and Marcus walked away, leaving David standing frozen in the middle of his own wedding reception, surrounded by guests who were all asking the same question. What else had he lied about? But Sarah didn't look back. She'd said what she came to say, not out of cruelty or revenge, but out of a deep commitment to truth. She was done carrying David's version of her story. The drive home was quiet at first. Then Marcus started laughing, not mean laughter, but the kind of amazed laughter that comes from witnessing something extraordinary. "You know what just happened back there?" he said. "You didn't just confront your ex-husband. You showed everyone in that room what it looks like when someone refuses to be diminished by someone else's narrative about them." Sarah leaned back in the passenger seat, one hand on her belly, watching the city lights blur past the window. "I spent so many years being angry about what he took from me. But tonight, I realized he actually gave me something incredible." "What's that?" "Proof that I was strong enough to survive losing everything. Proof that my worth was never tied to his opinion of me. And proof that the life I've built, our life, is so much better than anything I ever could have had with him." 3 months later, Sarah got a call from Jessica. David's new wife had left him after discovering a pattern of financial deception that went back years. Not just with Sarah, but with previous girlfriends, business partners, even his own family. Jessica was starting over, and she wanted to know if Sarah's business program could help her. Sarah invited Jessica to coffee, and what started as a conversation about business became the beginning of an unlikely friendship. Jessica became one of the most successful graduates of the Reclaim Your Crown program, eventually starting a financial consulting business that helped women protect their assets in relationships. "You know what's funny?" Jessica said to Sarah one day about a year later. "David thought he was so smart playing us against each other, but he actually introduced 2 women who were destined to change the world together." Because that's what they were doing, one woman at a time. Sarah's business had evolved beyond jewelry into a full empowerment platform. She'd written a book, started a podcast, and was speaking at conferences around the country. The Reclaim Your Crown program had helped over 500 women start their own businesses. The triplets, 2 girls and a boy, were born healthy and perfect on a snowy December morning. Sarah held them for the first time and felt overwhelmed by gratitude, not just for them, but for the entire journey that had led to this moment. "They're never going to know a world where Mommy doesn't know her own worth," she whispered to them, tears streaming down her face. Marcus, exhausted but glowing with pride, kissed her forehead. They're going to grow up watching their mom show other women how to build empires from ashes. Can you imagine how powerful that's going to make them? To let someone else's betrayal become her life sentence. It's in every daughter who grows up knowing that her worth isn't tied to someone else's ability to see it. David, last Sarah heard, he was working as a sales manager for someone else's company, still telling people that his ex-wife had trust issues that destroyed their marriage, still rewriting history to avoid taking responsibility for his choices. But his version of the story doesn't matter anymore, because Sarah learned the most important lesson of all. You don't need someone else to validate your worth, and you certainly don't need their permission to rebuild your life into something extraordinary. The woman who walked into that wedding reception carrying triplets and running $1 million business wasn't seeking revenge. She was simply living her truth. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do. Because here's what I want you to remember from Sarah's story.
The person who broke you is not the one who gets to decide who you become. The money they took, the dreams they shattered, the future they stole, none of that defines your capacity for rebuilding. Your capacity for rebuilding is infinite and it's uniquely yours. Sarah's story isn't just about one woman's triumph over betrayal. It's about the profound truth that sometimes our greatest gifts come disguised as our worst losses. Sometimes the person who breaks us is actually the one who sets us free to become who we were always meant to be. So, if you're watching this video because someone broke your heart, took your money, or convinced you that you weren't capable of more, this is your reminder that their version of your story is not the final draft. You're the author of your own life, and the best chapters are often written after you thought the book was over. The question isn't whether you'll survive what happened to you. The question is, what incredible thing will you build from the pieces?